appreciate your willingness to testify. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being here today. The focus of today's hearing is the FCC's fiscal year 2017 budget request. Although, like me, I'm sure our subcommittee members will have other policy items to discuss, let's start with the Commission's funding. The Commission has requested a total of $358 million for fiscal year 2017. However, the Commission is yet again requesting transfers of non-appropriated funding from the Universal Service Fund of $9.5 million. So in total resources, the Commission is requesting $368 million for 2017, which by all appearances looks like a decrease of $25.7 million, or a 7% decrease from last year. However, most of the decrease is because the remaining costs of the Commission's headquarters move are about 1/3 of last year's costs. Excluding the moving costs, the Commission is requesting an $11 million increase in salaries and expenses. And while the FCC is fee-funded, these fees are directly passed on to the consumers. Anyone who has a phone can see these fees in their monthly bill. For this reason, I believe the costs of the FCC's operations are closely felt by consumers and warrant close scrutiny by this committee and this Congress. This committee has held the FCC's operating level flat since fiscal year 2012 because we believe the Commission can and should do less with less. I believe this regulatory system works best when we can encourage innovation in the free market so that the costs to consumers stay as low as possible. The greater the amount of competition, the less need for regulation. It seems, however, that for the past few years, the Commission has been putting forward solutions that don't always reach a problem. Last year, the committee tried to codify what you, Chairman Wheeler, had stated publicly and repeatedly, that the Commission would not regulate rates for broadband service. We agree with you. We thought codifying this was a reasonable way to go and would give some certainty to the market. My thinking was, if you say you're not going to regulate rates, then why not write it down? However, when we reached out to your office for technical assistance in writing the language, we hit a brick wall. This was both surprising and disappointing. I'll have a few questions for both of you on this, and I understand our friends at the Energy and Commerce Committee marked up a bill today on this very topic. On a similar note, I thought the committee took a reasonable approach to the Commission's open Internet order. Last year, this committee included a legislative stay in our bill requiring the courts to determine the legality of the rule before it was implemented. A decision by the courts may be handed down any day now, and I know we will all be looking closely at the verdict. However, I believe both the Commission and the industry feel certain of an appeal by one side or the other, and therefore this committee maintains a position that a legislative stay is necessary until the courts have their final say. We're also looking forward to seeing how the upcoming incentive auction goes. The AWS auction at the end of 2014 was one of the, for the record books, just over $41 billion in revenue, and we expect the upcoming incentive auction to generate billions in dollars for deficit reduction. My understanding is the incentive auction will end within this current year, so I'm interested to hear why the Commission thinks it needs an additional $7 million or $124 million total for the administration of the auctions in 2017. The fiscal year 2016 omnibus included language grandfathering the existing joint sales agreements, the so-called JSAs, for 10 years. These are agreements between broadcast TV stations in the same market who will share advertising and other resources. The committee believes these agreements allow TV stations to better serve viewers in smaller markets and ensure that these communities continue to have access to numerous free local programming options. However, Chairman Wheeler, I'm hearing concerns from my broadcasters in my district regarding the Commission's recent actions relating to GSA, so I'll have a question or two about that as well. And finally, I know last Thursday the Commission proposed consumer privacy rules for Internet service providers. Many have expressed concern that these rules would not harmonize with the regulatory privacy framework that's already in place. I look forward to hearing from you both on your thoughts on how you think the FCC should best move forward in this area. I'm eager to hear from both of you about your thoughts on the future of the Commission. The FCC has significant work to do, and I hope that we can talk today about how this agency can operate more efficiently and more effectively. So thank you both for the work that you do and your staff, and I look forward to your testimony. Now I'd like to turn to my ranking member, Mr. Serrano, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to join you in welcoming Chairman Wheeler and Commissioner Pai back before the subcommittee. This is the third year we've had this dynamic duo. With all the respects of Batman and Robin, before our subcommittee, and I'm sure we will continue to have a stimulating discussion on the many issues facing the Federal Communications Commission. Last year, the FCC was a central point of debate on this committee for both numerous funding and policy issues. The end result is that the omnibus removed several controversial riders and significantly increased funding for the agency for the first time in several years. This year, your budget request is for $358 million in funding, which is 6.7% less than the fiscal year 2016. The reason for this decrease is that we were able to largely fund your efforts to save costs in a long term by transitioning to a location with a smaller footprint. I look forward to discussing how these plans are going and how this year's request builds upon last year's funding. It should come as no surprise that members often take this opportunity to discuss issues that move beyond the budget request. In fact, last year's hearing was devoted almost exclusively to the one topic, the FCC's open Internet rule. We recently celebrated the first anniversary of that rule, and I think it is safe to say that it has been a rousing success. None of the fears that opponents of the rule advanced in the lead-up to its implementation have come to pass. There has been increased investment, continued expansion, and increased profits for Internet service providers. I believe that this is a settled issue. Net neutrality is good for consumers, good for innovators, and ultimately good for business. Although I don't doubt that we will have some more discussion on it today, I think it is important to recognize the positive impact these rules have already had. Beyond net neutrality, the FCC is dealing with numerous issues important to consumers, local businesses, and all that affect our constituents. From privacy to expanding the Lifeline program to include broadband to opening up the set-top box market, I commend the FCC for taking an active role to better the lives of those we have been elected to represent. I hope that we all keep consumers foremost in our minds as we discuss these issues going forward today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. And now I'd like to recognize Chairman Wheeler for his opening statement. If you could keep that in the neighborhood of 5 minutes, your full remarks will be made part of the permanent record.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Serrano, members of the committee. There's attached to my statement a set of PowerPoint slides that we can run through, and I'll try and truncate as much as possible the direct time here. The executive summary on the first slide, as you point out, Mr. Chairman, we're down $26 million from last year, which, as you say, is principally as a result of the move reduction. We have the fewest FTEs since in the last 30 years. We have had essentially a flat budget since 2010. The IT investments that you have authorized us to make are paying off, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And you referenced the pay-go for universal service. We have heard clearly from Congress your concerns about waste, fraud, and abuse in that program. I'll review that in a little more detail shortly, but the bottom line is that there needs to be a police force, and that police force should be paid for by those that they are protecting, not by broadcasters and others, and that's our proposal. Slide 2 is a quick overview that on the left you can see the base budget frozen, and on the right you can see FTEs at their lowest level. And as you said, Mr. Chairman, these are all non-tax dollars. But let's get to the meat of the proposal here. With last year's budget, ends up on the right with what we're proposing for this year and shows the major changes throughout. So let's just walk left to right. There's $4 million for salary, inflation, and contract increases that are beyond our control. There's $5 million for moving legacy apps to the cloud, which is the next logical step of what you've funded us to do in the past. There's $2 million for a protective analytics software package that allows us to catch inappropriate USF claims, and I'll talk more about that in a second. And then there is roughly $10 million funding from the Universal Service Fund to police the USF, and we'll have more on that in a minute. But the question arises here, obviously, okay, if that pay-go component is not adopted, then there's a $10 million shortfall on the budget. And since most of our expenses are fixed, we have limited options, excuse me, in terms of where our variable expenses could be cut. So what are the kind of variable expenses that we're talking about beyond USF enforcement? And they're listed on the right side here. Field reinvestment. We've got out-of-date equipment in our field offices. We're modernizing our field offices. We need new equipment for the new challenges. We need to improve our public safety systems. We are the only repository for information on what's happening on networks. If you want to apply big data to cyber challenges, if you want to apply big data to what's happening with public safety, et cetera, we're the only folks, and we need to modernize those systems. We need to reduce the burdens for broadcasters and mobile operators in their licensing systems with new systems there. We need to make our public filing process more transparent. And add a couple other things that aren't on your chart. We need mapping tools for rural programs. We're going to be moving into a Mobility Fund 2 that will deliver broadband into unserved areas, and then an auction to deliver fixed broadband into unserved areas. We have to be able to map to those areas, and current capabilities are inadequate to do that. We need to reduce the burden on those who are seeking equipment authorization by giving them new automated systems. And lastly, our report from FSMA on our cyber exposure says that we're halfway there. We got to get the rest of the way there. So that's the base fees that we're talking about. If you go to the auction page, which is page 4, and do the similar kind of read from left to right, we are looking at a $3 million decrease in the broadcast administrator that you authorized last year because, I'm sorry, that you appropriated last year because that has been done and paid for. There's about $1 million attributable to auctions that are, again, beyond our control. There's a $5 million number here for current auctions that is apparently confusing to some, and let me be a little more specific about that. The incentive auction, which starts 2 weeks from today, is not the only auction that we're going to be running. We've got to run a 3.5 gig auction, which is going to be about 500,000 licenses re-auctioned every 3 years. We have the re-auction of the AWS-3 that you referenced, Mr. Chairman. We have reclaimed some of those, and we have to re-auction them. We've got an FM radio auction that we have to run. We've got an FM translator auction we have to run. We've got the Connect America Fund unserved areas auction that we have to run. Those costs are frankly greater than the $5 million number that you see here. But we, again, we've been able to move things around to make sure that we can do all of this. The next number here is a $4 million software modernization. We did that software modernization in the auction for the incentive auction, but we haven't been able to do it for the other auctions. And then lastly is the Spectrum Pipeline Act that you all passed at the end of the last Congress. And it's spending $4 million to raise what has been booked in the budget as $4 billion. What is this? Why can't this be done and just, folded into the cracks? Here we're talking about custom analysis of spectrum and how various blocks of spectrum overlap with each other, how that can be mitigated, and how that can open up the spectrum blocks that you have instructed us to go find. It is a non-trivial undertaking, and again, it's something that you mandated us to do. In the middle of that chart are the kind of deliverables that that come out of this. So, but an important point, and you raised this, Mr. Chairman, so let me answer it directly. If the incentive auction is coming to a close, why in the world do we need more money? It's a very legitimate question. And the answer to it, I don't mean to be flip, is that the incentive auction isn't coming to a close. The gavel may come down on the bidding part, which will probably happen sometime in early FY17. But the work just begins then. The bidding is the easy part. There are about 2,200 broadcast television licensees in the United States. Every one that remains will have to be repacked. May involve new channel numbers, new location of their antennas, and somebody is going to have to oversee and coordinate that. Interesting, in one of today's trades, yeah.
You can wrap that up. We can talk about that some.
Okay, talk about that in specific. Sure. Then I'll tell. Well, let me go back here. If we cannot deliver on this second part, which is scheduled to last 39 months, and which the broadcasters say is not enough time, and we say we think it is, but we guarantee it isn't if we don't have the necessary resources. And that's what we're asking for, are those necessary resources. It is also equally important to the wireless industry, because they have to get access to that spectrum so they can begin offering services. So the heavy lifting, it's been a non-trivial activity to get to this point, but when the gavel falls, we need to make sure that we all recognize that that's just the beginning of this exercise.
We'll finish that up.
We'll talk on about the budget and the other stuff. I'm happy to.
Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Pai for his opening statement.
Chairman Crenshaw, Ranking Member Serrano, members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding this hearing, and it's a privilege to appear before you once again with my friend and colleague, Chairman Tom Wheeler. Last year, I offered 3 specific suggestions regarding the Commission's budget request, and I'm pleased that the subcommittee and Congress generally took these recommendations into account. First, Congress provided the FCC with specific budget authority for moving the agency's headquarters, instead of including those funds in our general budget. This was the fiscally responsible approach, and I applaud the Commission for agreeing with this approach in this year's request. Second, the subcommittee rejected the FCC's request to transfer $25 million from the Universal Service Fund to the Commission. I opposed this transfer request at the time because it would have imposed a stealth tax increase on the American people. I'm therefore disappointed that the Commission is yet again seeking to siphon money from the USF. In my view, USF funds should be spent across this country, closing the digital divide, not at the FCC's headquarters in Washington. Third, the subcommittee prohibited the Commission from regulating broadband rates. I was disappointed that Congress didn't enact this prohibition, but it remains important. Supporters of internet regulation disclaim any interest in regulating broadband rates. For example, Chairman Wheeler told your counterparts in the Senate last year, and I quote, "If Congress was to come along and say that's off the table for the next commission too, I have no difficulty with it." But given past experience, Congress shouldn't just trust promises to avoid rate regulation. For example, 2 years ago, I raised concerns about the effect that the FCC's new policy on joint sales agreements, or JSAs, between television stations would have on a JSA in Wichita that enabled Entravision to provide the only Spanish-language news in Kansas. FCC leadership assured this very subcommittee that JSA would not be impacted, saying, and I quote, "There is no way, shape, or form that the kinds of positive things that you, I, have been talking about here will not be allowed under the process going forward." Yet just last month, the FCC's Media Bureau ordered that this very JSA be terminated. Given this experience, the only way to ensure that rate regulation doesn't happen is for Congress to take a Reagan-inspired approach. Trust, but codify. Additionally, as you begin drafting our appropriations bill for fiscal year 2017, I would like to draw the subcommittee's attention to 3 additional concerns. 1, I urge the subcommittee to prevent the FCC from using any appropriated funds to impose a broadband tax. By reclassifying internet service providers as telecommunications carriers last year, the FCC explicitly opened the door to a tax on internet access for every single consumer who goes online. Unless Congress acts, I believe that the FCC will impose that tax. Earlier this year, Congress overwhelmingly passed the Permanent Internet Tax Freedom Act, which made permanent the ban on state and local taxation of internet access. Having thus protected consumers' pockets, it would be quite unfortunate if Congress allowed the FCC to pick them with a nationwide broadband tax in the stealthy darkness of the next Washington winter. 2, I'm skeptical of the Commission's proposal to raise spending on the auctions program to $124 million. The $117 million being spent this year is a record, and it's obvious why. This year, in a couple of weeks, we are holding the world's first incentive auction, an enormously complicated endeavor requiring plenty of resources. But by fiscal year 2017, the incentive auction will likely be over, and there is no comparable spectrum auction on the horizon. A $7 million increase in auction spending thus seems unnecessary. 3, I recommend that this subcommittee examine carefully the budget request for the FCC's Office of Media Relations. For fiscal year 2017, the FCC requests 15 full-time employees, or FTEs, for this office. By comparison, in its fiscal year 2017 budget request, the Federal Trade Commission only requests 10 FTEs for its media office. I don't know why the FCC's Media Relations Office should be 50% larger than the FTC's, but I do know that there's been a disturbing mission creep within the FCC over the last couple of years when it comes to media relations. Specifically, non-public information is often shared with the press, while commissioners' offices are often left in the dark. Consider what happened just last week, when the chairman circulated his proposal to expand the Lifeline program. My office learned about it not from anyone at the FCC, but from the New York Times. Moreover, following the publication of the New York Times article, FCC officials held a call with a large group of reporters to spin the Lifeline proposal before giving commissioners a copy. Yet somehow, the FCC's rules bar me from sharing any details about the plan or even the plan itself with you or with the American public. If the FCC's Office of Media Relations has the time and the resources to engage in activities more suited to a partisan political campaign than the rulemaking process conducted by a multi-member administrative agency, then I humbly submit that it's too large and its budget should be cut substantially. Chairman Crenshaw, Ranking Member Serrano, and members of the subcommittee, thank you once again for holding this hearing. As always, I appreciate the work that you and your tireless staff have done over the past year, and I look forward to working with you in formulating the FCC's budget.
Well, thank you very much, and now we'll begin a round of questions. Let's use the 5-minute clock, which means when 5 minutes is up, that means if you're answering a question or you're asking a question, the 5 minutes is up. We want to probably have another vote in about an hour and a half, so we want to try to get at least one round of questions in. So if everybody would try to observe that. Let me start by asking Commissioner or Chairman Wheeler when I talked about in my opening statement this whole question of regulating rates for broadband service. As you know, a couple of times, maybe several times, you had repeated publicly that statement that the Commission was not going to regulate broadband service. And I think there was some vagueness in the open internet order about whether that was going to happen or not. And so people were a little uneasy. People just want to have certainty. And if you're going to invest a lot of money in infrastructure that's going to be out for 10 or 15 years, you want to know what the future looks like. And so when we tried to kind of come up with the language to put that in the bill, we actually contacted your staff and said, could you help us with some technical language to actually draft this? And as I said in my opening statement, it was like a brick wall. We got no response. We asked back in June. And so I guess my question is, what was the reticence? What caused this lack of response from your staff? Do you have an answer to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that there's a couple of things, Ajit. I think there's a couple of things there. First of all, the statement you cite has become somewhat apocryphal. I sent a letter last night to the chairman and ranking member of the Commerce Committee to try and lay out exactly what had been said. And the context, I think, is important to answering your question. The question that I had been asked was about the forbearance that we had put in for Section 201B of the Act. And somebody said in question, well, what about if the next chairman comes along and decides to de-forbear? And I said, I got no problem if you prohibit de-forbearing, if there is such a word. And that has, morphed over time to be some comment about general rate regulation.
Well, let me ask you,
Again, I
did
go
you-
back to, so I think our
Say
position.
you didn't say that? I'm just telling you.
No, I was talking about.
Did you say that you didn't think the commission ought to regulate broadband rates?
We have forborne from regulating
Is that-
broadband rates.
Is that the same thing?
We've said we will, yes, we will not regulate broadband
Okay.
rates. And the question to me was, okay, the next guy, we trust you, the next guy comes along, or gal, what happens? And I said, fine, if you want to go ahead and codify that de-forbearance. But then the whole issue became something far greater, which was.
Are you explaining why they wouldn't help us write the language to implement what you'd said?
My hope, sir, and my understanding is that implementing what I said was possible. The difficulty was that there have been multiple efforts to go far beyond to hit the broader question of rate regulation writ large. And whether the
All I
commissioners
know
were ready.
is this subcommittee said, when we heard you say you didn't think that the commission would regulate rates for broadband service, we said, why don't we write that down? And we needed some technical assistance because that's what you guys do. And we asked your staff, could you help us write that down? And they didn't say, well, it's too complicated, or the chairman doesn't have everything that he needs. They just didn't say anything. And so I'm just really wondering, because if you're not going to help us do that, we'll try to do it on our own. We were kind of giving you the opportunity to have your staff, So you need to tell us, because if you're not going to do it, they just need to say, we're not going to do that. Actually, we I think, got some information sometime, we asked in June, I think sometime in November, I think here's a proposal. It didn't really answer the question. So I guess the question is, if you'll do that, I mean, if you'd agree to do that, just tell us, and then tell us you're going to do it within a reasonable amount of time. If not, say we're not going to do it.
We would be happy to assist in the development of language that fulfills what I said.
Okay. Well, then, can you do that in the next couple of weeks?
Sure.
Okay. Well,
Matt, yes, sir.
okay. Well, let me. My time is about up, so let's keep going, and let's turn to Mr. Serrano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Wheeler, for the first time since FY13, the FCC received an increase of $44 million in the most recent bill. It was mainly for a move out of your current space that will end up saving around $119 million, according to your estimates. Hopefully, that will encourage the subcommittee to give you more funding in the future, since they see the good things that could come from it. Does OMB support it, and has this been done? This year, you've actually asking for a bit of a decrease, in part because a large chunk of the move that we funded last year is a one-time expense, and partially because you've asked for $9.5 million in recovery of USF oversight costs. You've requested this in previous years, and the subcommittee has not agreed to it, but this is significantly modified from your previous request. Please explain it to us and why it is necessary. And I'm sorry that I asked you the final part first. Does OMB support it? Has it been done before?
Thank you very much, Congressman. Yes, OMB supports this. We believe that we're going to hear from GSA in the next couple of weeks as to what happens. And as we discussed last year, this is a two-tranche project with the move is with the big one happening last year, and this being the follow-on, closing the expenses. Insofar as the universal service police force, if you will, what I've been saying about how do we make sure that we target waste, fraud, and abuse. We've had a three-tier approach to that. The first has been to put systems in place. We now have the duplicate database, which my predecessor, Julia Janikowski, did. We will be voting on an order later this month that ends what I call the fox guarding the henhouse self-certification program and establishes a national verifier rather than trusting others to do it for us. Secondly is the software program that I mentioned that actually looks for anomalies. You take all the data that you get in and you apply big data principles to it, and you can sort through and look for statistical anomalies and say, hey, we've got to go put shoe leather against that. That then leads to okay, how do you have the shoe leather? And that's what the 9.5 request is for. I heard your message loud and clear. Last year, what I was saying was, I think that it makes sense that all universal service program costs should be funded as a part of the program. I heard you loud and clear saying no. At the same point in time, I'm hearing from members of this committee and other members of Congress about what are you doing to police the universal service program and make sure that the people's money is spent as it's supposed to be spent. And my point is, we've got this three-tiered process in place, but I think that the policing ought to be paid for by what is being policed, and not by broadcasters and cable operators and ham operators and wireless carriers and others who are tangential to the whole operation.
Do I have the time left? Mr. Pai, do you totally agree with him? Totally is a dangerous question.
Congressman, I take a somewhat different view on the Universal Service Fund. Zooming out to 60,000 feet, let's think about what the purpose of the Universal Service Fund is. It's to make sure that all Americans in this country, consistent with Section 1 of the Communications Act, have access to cutting-edge communications services. And so for me, that $9.5 million or $25 million last year, whatever that number is, every dollar we take from the fund is one less dollar for low-income students to be able to access the internet in your district. It's one less dollar for rural Alaskans to be able to get fiber to their village. It's one less dollar for people in my home state of Kansas to be able to participate in the rural health care program. That's why I think it's critical for us to treat the USF for the purpose it was originally meant for, which is closing the digital divide. Now, the second part of that is I completely agree with the chairman that we need to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. But under our rules and under the laws set forth by Congress, the regulatory fees that are paid for by the people we regulate have to be related to the cost of administering our regulations. And so, for example, under the Universal Service Fund, if there are particular costs to administering it, then those should be passed on to the people who benefit from it, for example, wireline and wireless carriers. If there are broadcast regulations that need to be administered, then broadcasters have to pay for it. That's the way, I think, to attack that problem, not to take money from one pot that's meant to benefit all Americans and transfer it to the headquarters in Washington.
Can I just say one thing? That this committee has done that in the past with this program, specifically twice, having targeted appropriations for the Office of Inspector General for the purpose of delivering the kind of thing that I've just been talking about, and then those haven't been funded in subsequent years.
Thank you. I'll turn to Mr. Graves.
Mr. Chairman. Chairman, Commissioner, good to see you. It's timely you're here today, given an issue that's been in the news recently about set-top boxes, and want to talk about that in a minute. And feel free to define that term also. It's an industry term, I assume. But just knowing what interest you've taken as a commission of recent, and then knowing how the industry over the past several years have just been doing some amazing things with new technology. In fact, bringing programming to individuals, people, wherever they are, whenever they want to watch something, and now understanding that the Commission is moving into a new phase of wanting to regulate or mandate various items within this sector. So for me, and I guess for the committee as well, knowing that your interest is always consumer protection and many different ways, generally things like this come from an outcry somewhere. So Commissioner Pai, maybe you could just help us understand what is the problem that's trying to be solved here, and where did it derive from?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Unfortunately, the problem, to the extent there is one, in the marketplace for navigation devices or set-top boxes, whatever you want to call that clunky, expensive equipment that nobody seems to want, is the fact that the FCC has had a highly intrusive set of regulations to create the market that it thought it wanted. And the problem is that the marketplace, as typically happens, has greatly outpaced where regulations are. 20 years ago, I used to watch Seinfeld using a set-top box that would transmit information to my television screen. Last night, I went to my smartphone, pulled up a Crackle app, and watched Seinfeld's show with Steve Martin, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. This is just how different the marketplace is. And so for the FCC, it doesn't seem to me we should be doubling down on this 1990s technology that nobody seems to want. We should be encouraging an app economy, something that's much more consumer-friendly, that's more flexible, it's more competitive, because in the future, 3 years from now, which is the earliest point at which these proposed regulations could possibly take effect, who knows where the marketplace could be? The Amazon Echo could be the navigation device, the set-top box of the future, or it could be an app. So I tend to think that we should focus more on some things that are actually concerning to consumers as opposed to trying to issue backward-looking technological mandates that won't solve a problem.
And so what is the overarching problem, though, that's the Commission's trying to solve?
Well, the problem as stated by the FCC's majority is that the marketplace for set-top boxes is not competitive. And their argument is that the market share held by certain cable operators for the set-top boxes is large, and that people really don't buy competitive set-top boxes. But it seems to me that if you talk to consumers, especially younger consumers who are often on the leading edge of the video revolution, they don't think about, with any excitement anyway, the next set-top box that the FCC is going to help them get into their homes. They're thinking about ways to access video directly through much more technologically sophisticated means.
Right, and you referenced apps, and I know you can pretty much go to any website, whether it's I don't know, any sports website, and if you want to watch a sports programming, you would log in under your login or preference based on your provider of some sort. So access is currently there, and I guess my question, and maybe Chairman, you can help me understand this, how does imposing a new mandate benefit the industry in any way or consumers in any way? Because traditionally, I think our understanding is that mandates create barriers oftentimes and less access.
Thank you, Congressman. Excuse me. Yes, I agree that the world is going to software and to apps. Unfortunately, the example that Commissioner Pai gave about you could tune your channel using an Echo isn't possible because the cable operators won't give the information that would be necessary for an Echo to operate, and therein lies the rub. This Congress has said in Section 629 of the Communications Act that there shall be available to consumers competitive alternatives for navigation devices. And there has not been for the last 20 years. We have now gotten to a point where technology makes that possible. The very apps that you're talking about, that kind of approach, the very fact that you can protect copyright and watch things on your iPad, your Android device, or your smart TV, is the same kind of thing that opens up this opportunity. And when there is a clear-cut, black-letter mandate from the Congress saying consumers shall, not may, shall have choices, and the Commission shall do this, that is what we're following through on, because 99% of American MBT, the cable and satellite subscribers have no choice in what their boxes are or their apps are. You take that which is provided to you by the cable company. All we're saying is we want to provide all the same protections the cable operator has today, but just make sure that they talk to these other devices, like the Commissioner mentioned, an Echo or anything else, so that that can control open access, and then you can make a decision, do I need to have the $10 a month that I keep paying for this box? I mean, the average home pays $230 a year for a box they really don't need, and that they're told they have to rent. It's like the old days when we used to have to rent phones.
Chairman, if I could just follow up, how does this differ from, in the past, paid programming? You know, whether it be sports programming or movie programming, Showtime, HBO, or any other programming. What's the difference in that today and in the past, and why now?
I'm not sure I understand, but if you're saying, would there be, sorry, thanks, would there
It wasn't
be?
equal access. At that time, you had to go through a provider, you had to have paid
And you still would, and you still would under this proposal. Nothing changes. What happens is that the cable operator's content, the tiers they have, the authorization as to whether you can record, the protection for privacy, all of these kinds of things remain the same. The information that they send upstream today only talks to a device that they control. And we're saying open up that so it can talk to other devices, just like your smart TV talks to Netflix or Hulu or whatever the case may be, and allow for that kind of openness so the consumer has a choice between paying that $10 a month every month, month after month, or having an alternative choice. But, let's be clear. We do not want to infringe on the structure of the programming market that cable operators are doing. This is a proposal, and if there are holes in the proposal that they are concerned about, we want to hear from them. But the fascinating thing is, this is also a proposal that happens to track what they proposed in 2010 when they came forward and said, let's do something like
Under this
this.
proposal, it did allow cable providers to have access to Netflix or other programming that's outside of that set-top box.
Cable providers.
You mentioned broadcasters, you're talking about the box in which they,
So today,
Can you just give us a yes or no on that, because we got to move on?
there's a flaw in the assumption.
you
All right, we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Let's go now to Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's stay on the set-top box because it's what everybody at home can't wait to hear about. One of the concerns you mentioned was privacy.
Yes, sir.
So if you've got third-party people competing, opening up this market to them, do you have the authority, does the FCC have the authority to require these set-top box manufacturers and app developers to meet the privacy protections that we would be concerned about?
Thank you, sir. We have the authority to say that you don't have to deliver those signals to a box that does not meet the privacy requirements that we have, and then the FTC and the state AGs have the same kind of authority that they have on the boxes as they have over smart TVs and everything else.
Do you think that still meets the same concerns, having to do it that way?
I think that it's actually tougher privacy than exists today. You can access information on your smart TV. Samsung put out an alert a couple of weeks ago saying, make sure when you're talking in front of your TV that you're aware that we're listening to you and we're going to be mining that information.
Well, let me just mention the other issue that was brought up along those lines, and that's the copyright protections.
Right.
As you've gone forward with this rule, have you all been working with the U.S. Copyright Office, making sure that what we're saying is accurate as far as they're concerned?
We want to maintain all the existing copyright protections, and part of the whole process, obviously, is working with the Copyright Office, sir.
Okay.
Congressman, one of the things that I think is remarkable about this proceeding is that dogs and cats, so to speak, have come together. Video distributors and video programmers have spoken with a unified voice, saying that they have great concerns, especially when it comes to copyright. And one of the reasons why, one of the examples they give, is advertising. Nothing in the proposal the FCC adopted, over my dissent and the dissent of one of my colleagues, would prevent a third-party set-top box manufacturer from taking the programming stream, which includes certain advertising, and either removing that advertising and inserting their own, or layering their own advertising on the side. And one of the concerns is that the third-party set-top box manufacturer would be monetizing their knowledge about what you watch, when you watch, how often you watch it, et cetera, and inserting its own advertising. That's a species of the privacy concern that they have. Similar concerns have been voiced on the copyright side as well. And so I think it's remarkable for those two entities, as I said, to unify on this, and it speaks to the fact that I think the FCC really needs to proceed with great caution.
So we're in a hurry. Quick response. The incentive auction, repackaging all these stations, we've set aside $1.7 billion to the fund to cover the entire cost of repackaging more than 1,400 TV stations. We're hearing that it's going to be far more expensive. What do we do?
So I think that we'll know that, because you don't know what the answer to that question is until you know who's participating in the auction. We'll have a good feel of that within 90 days of the close of the auction, and I will be, if there's not enough money, I will be the first person, I'll be leading the parade to come back up here and say, yes, we need money in that pot. But the important thing also, I just want to reiterate what I said about the budget, is that if we cut the amount of money that we're requesting in the auction, which is an increase, it is going to have an impact on the ability to move these broadcasters and to do the kind of coordination that's necessary.
So, and all of this, if you want to comment, great. 39 months, same thing. Are you going to, is this enough, or are we going to ask for an extension?
So, you know, we have studies. There are all kinds of studies that say, the NAB first filed and said 30 months. Now they say it may be 10 years. I think we will know that again when we know the scope of the challenge that we face. We have also built into our 39 months a waiver process. So if it doesn't work for this station or that station, there's a waiver that they can get. But again, that is something that we would make an assessment of when you know what the facts are rather than the hypotheticals.
Given the limited time, I just want to make sure that you want to comment.
Thank you, Congressman. With respect to the budget, the $1.75 billion that Congress allocated for the relocation fund is all that we've got. And so that's why I proposed a couple of years ago that we treat that as a budget, because otherwise it comes out of the pockets of the broadcasters who have to repack. I'm not sure whether we are going to exceed that number, but if we do, then I think it will be ultimately up to Congress to make a determination. With respect to timing, I think if we get credible information that it will take longer than that, then we have to consider what options we have at the FCC, either the waiver process the Chairman mentioned, or Congress may have to take action as well to ensure that we don't have a train wreck.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Mr. Yoder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Wheeler, Commissioner Pai, welcome back to the committee. It's always one of the more interesting, entertaining hearings that we have each year.
Can the record show that we just agreed on something?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
let's take a moment, just a moment of silence there. Rock chalk to you, Commissioner Pai. It is March Madness.
Amen, Congressman.
And we are
America's team.
the number one. I don't know if anyone noticed that or not, but
Yeah. Speaking impartially, I agree with you.
yeah, thank you. I want to ask you both about the issues surrounding joint sales agreements. And as we know, joint sales agreements have been credited with a lot of positive things, saving millions of dollars, and my state allowing for the only local Spanish language channel in Kansas. It's even been credited with saving lives due to tornadoes and such, where Doppler radar has been invested in Joplin and other parts of the country. And in spite of bipartisan support, in 2014, the FCC made significant changes to the ability for entities to continue to have joint sales agreements and effectively ended many, if not all, of the joint sales agreements. And I understand that there has been some concerns of bad actors, but it appears we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. This subcommittee then last year included language in its appropriations bill that superseded, grandfathered the agreements that were in place, I think, on March 31st, 2014. And that language didn't say unless the parties change hands or unless the legal entities change. It said that the agreements themselves were superseded. I know, Chairman Wheeler, you and Commissioner Pai, you've seen the bipartisan letter from senators that range pretty far across the spectrum. You've got Senator Blunt to Dick Durbin, to Mikulski, to Chuck Schumer, Cory Gardner, Tim Scott. You know, it's kind of hard to get all those folks together and agree on something. So you've got them to agree that they believe that the FCC, in essentially prohibiting and unwinding those agreements, is violating not only the spirit but the letter of the law that was passed through this subcommittee last year. And so I guess, Chairman Wheeler, I give you a chance to respond to those concerns, and then Commissioner Pai to give your perspective on it as well.
Thank you, Congressman. The precedent at the Commission has always been that when a license is sold and a new license is issued to a new buyer, it is a new license. And the terms and conditions that were once ascribed to the previous license and the previous owner do not transfer. We've held that for 30 years across a vast array of cases. And that's the situation here. that you bet, Congressman, all JSAs extant to the date that you passed your rider are grandfathered. But when the license goes away and a new license is issued, the terms and conditions of the deceased license don't transfer.
Commissioner Pai, do you agree with that? And then what are the practical results of that interpretation of the law we just passed a couple months ago?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I think it's very disturbing that 2 years ago in this very room, the FCC committed to this very subcommittee that that particular JSA would be protected. Nothing what we are doing will make this go away, according to the chairman back in 2014. In the meantime, Congress overwhelmingly and in a bipartisan way told the FCC, we want you to grandfather any JSAs that are in existence. And as he pointed out, there wasn't any wiggle room for license transfers or the like. The law was the law. And I would humbly submit to you that if the agency is to be bound by the principle that ours is a government of laws and not of men, then we need to respect the bipartisan will of Congress as expressed in the law and as recently as last Friday reified by a pretty diverse group of a dozen senators. And I think we also need to think about the impact that this is going to have on the industry going forward. If the FCC is not bound by the law that is set forth by Congress, if it's essentially left to its own whim, then we're going to be left in the situation we were in before Congress said, which is, before Congress spoke, which is that we have this inchoate waiver process where a few favored parties might get a waiver and the vast majority of them don't. That doesn't create a lot of certainty for the industry. It's also not fair for a lot of the parties who entered into these transactions years ago and were explicitly told by the FCC they were okay. So I think Congress certainly needs to be much more specific next time, if necessary, to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Chairman Wheeler, I kind of agree with Commissioner Pai here, and it seems like the intent of Congress, regardless of precedent within FCC, was to protect these agreements, and the practical realities of them are that now they're being eliminated. How do you respond to that?
So I guess I just agree with Gray, who was involved, Gray Broadcasting, who was involved in this transaction, who filed with us and said, quote, the new law does not automatically grandfather the KDCU TV JSA because Gray was not a party to the KDCU JSA or any other JSA that was in effect. That has been long-standing processes at the Commission in multitudinous kinds of issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner. I want to talk about the set-top boxes again. I've heard comments from minority content providers that the FCC's proposed set-top box rule may negatively impact revenue for these content providers because set-top box manufacturers may be able to add layers of advertisement that would devalue the advertising slots that are incorporated into the program. Have you commissioned any studies, internal or external, to determine the impact, to project the impact of the set-top box proposal on minority programmers and the availability of diverse programming for consumers?
Thank you, Congressman. The interesting thing about minority programming is where you stand depends on where you sit. There are approximately 4 African-American-owned cable channels in the 500-channel universe. They have a good thing going. They like it.
Right.
There are well over 100 who are seeking access, have been denied access, and see this as an opportunity to get access. So this is why, there is a division on this issue of those that have and those that have not. And what we're trying to do is to see that there is a system that creates open opportunity for everybody. And if you get locked out by the cable operator, you're not sent over here into some programming purgatory where nobody will ever see what you've got. And that's what we're trying to accomplish.
So have you done a study on the, are you
On the,
going to do a
on the
study?
advertising issue, I'm sorry.
On the impact that the rule would have on those four?
We are, that's
Or
what,
any
that's
of
what we're
those
doing.
others who are trying to get in who haven't gotten in yet?
That's what we're doing right now. That's what the process of this notice and comment proceeding
So
is
you
about.
are doing
We're
a study on
seeking,
that.
we're seeking the comments for everybody to come in, both pro and con, and present for the record their own information on which we can make decisions.
Got it. Okay. With regard to the auction repackaging, several broadcasters in my district met with me recently to discuss some of their concerns regarding the upcoming Spectrum incentive auction, and they told me that a 39-month deadline for repacking Spectrum may not give them enough time because of the number of stations expected to be moved, which is predicted to be well over 1,000, and the limited availability of tower crews and tower manufacturers and even seasonal weather days. So what considerations has the FCC given to creating this 39-month deadline, and does the FCC have any plans to extend the deadline if it appears to be a problem for a considerable number of stations in order to get the job accomplished?
Thank you, sir.
Available crews and...
Yeah, it's a legitimate issue that has been raised. It is, I go back again to the budget. And if you cut the auction budget, it is going to have a direct impact on our ability to oversee this transaction. I hope that it's over 1,000 that are going to sell their licenses, but I don't know what the answer is. And obviously, if 500 participate, it's a different scaling challenge than it is with 1,000. Again, I think Commissioner Pai and I are in accord on the fact that, A, we need to have a waiver process, and B, if this situation comes in and it is so large that we have problems, then we have to revisit that whole thing. But right now, you know, there have been numerous studies. I mean, some people say 39 months is plenty. National Association of Broadcasters first filed.
Will you be flexible enough to extend the time so that...
Yes, sir. We have a waiver, first of all, and second of all, if there is this flood that needs to be dealt with, then it would be irresponsible if we don't deal with it.
All right. Do I have any more time left? Yeah. Okay. The internet is... Oh, well.
No, go ahead.
Okay. The internet is critical, obviously, in today's society to facilitate education work and for keeping in touch with loved ones, particularly in rural areas like my district. But to realize the benefits of some of the higher broadband with applications like telehealth, faster speeds are needed. The Commission recognized this last January when it changed the definition of broadband to 25 megabits per second and 4 megabits per second for download and upload speeds, respectively, as well as by increasing the bandwidth requirement for the receipt of Connect America funding. Unfortunately, many rural Georgians still have speeds below that threshold. Can you discuss the efforts that the FCC has undertaken, as well as any future plans you might have to help close the gap between rural and urban America and ensure that this large segment of our population does not remain locked out of education and business opportunities? And the follow-up to that would be, do you have any plans to increase minimum speeds for Connect America Fund to a level on par with the definition of broadband for the rest of the country?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Wheeler, you got 10 seconds. He used up all your answer time, but so quickly, if you can. If you can't.
I'm aware of everything he's talking about, and I would love to exchange, maybe we can get a specific, we can get an off sidebar here and we can talk about it. But yes, the answer is I believe that there are solutions on both of the things that you raised.
Let the record reflect his question lasted more than 4 seconds. Now, recognize Mr. Womack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see Mr. Wheeler and Mr. Pai again. While I was out, I understand that the ranking member asked a question of the chairman, and I want to come back to Commissioner Pai on it for a response, noting the statement on page 4 of the budget request, and I quote, "In addition, the Commission requests a transfer of $9.5 million from the Universal Service Fund to the Commission to cover costs related to the oversight of the USF programs for the Enforcement Bureau and for the Office of Managing Director. Commissioner Pai, do you believe it's appropriate for the Commission to operate outside the oversight of this committee and seek to use the USF intended to provide vital telecommunications service to those who may not otherwise have it to support general operations of the Commission?"
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I absolutely do not, first and foremost, because the purpose of the USF, as you pointed out, is to close the digital divide across the country, not to administer programs here in Washington, D.C.
Very good, thank you. Chairman Wheeler, focusing on the incentive auction and its potential impact on TV stations and viewers in my state, it's my understanding that broadcast stations being repacked with their assigned specific dates by which they have to be operating on their new channels. How will these dates be established?
So, again, we have to see what repacking is necessary, and we won't know that until after the auction. Again, it is a very complex issue, and I mean, the reality is that every station relates to every other station because it's a question of how you avoid interference. So what you do here in one station has an impact hundreds of miles away. And so it is a very arduous process. It depends upon how many stations there are in each market. It is why I said during my direct testimony that the kind of request that we are asking for in terms of auctions is crucial so that we can deal with this, because it's going to be a big deal. It has been no easy task to get to this point in the auction. But when the gavel falls, the game isn't over, it's just starting. And the broadcasters have the right to expect that we will make decisions working with them and help them through their problems. And yes, there are a limited number of tower crews, there's a limited number of building times, there's all kinds of limitations they face. And the wireless companies have a right to expect that what they paid billions for, they're going to be able to get access to now, not 5 years from now. That is a very arduous process.
How do you take into account adjacent markets and the potential interference in these dates?
How do you take into account? You have to, you're working to reduce the potential interference.
I mean, there'll be interference.
What we're trying to do is we have to build a program that leaves them with an equivalent market to what they had before they went into the auction, and that means protecting them from interference. So I'm not willing to stipulate to that assumption, sir. Our goal is to make sure that we have put together a package, and again, it's arduous, that makes sure that these kind of interference doesn't happen.
Commissioner Pai?
I agree with the chairman that it's arduous, and I agree that software is going to be necessary, sophisticated software, to structure the remaining broadcasting in such a way as to not cause interference. One thing I would include as a caveat, however, is that there could be interference by design, and what I mean by that is that the band plan that the FCC adopted over the objections of virtually everybody in the industry, the broadcasters, the wireless companies, and unlicensed advocates, would, for example, place broadcasters, full-power broadcasters, in the middle of the wireless band. And so you'd have, in the duplex gap, for example, you could have a broadcaster that could cause interference to other wireless carriers. And so that's one of the reasons why I expressed concern along the way that this band plan would essentially potentially incorporate interference into the remaining market, the resulting marketplace after the incentive auction is over.
Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have left?
28 seconds.
I know that look on your face when I've only got 28 seconds. And there's not enough time to answer this. Maybe we can do this for the record, but I had a privacy question. Maybe if another round we can come back to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Mr. Riggle.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Wheeler, Commissioner Pai, thank you for being here. It is one of the more interesting hearings that I attend, and I always learn something from this. Let me get right to it. Page 3 and page 4 of your written testimony, Commissioner Pai, paints really a troubling picture of, and it speaks for itself, but it's an increasing level of distrust, if you will. And I don't want to characterize it. It's here. It's written, but it's troubling. And circumvention of maybe the more expected communication methods from the chairman to the other commissioners. And I'm really going to direct the question to the chairman because I think he needs to address it directly. Bottom of page 3, for example, indeed the trade publication Communication Daily reported that last December that, quote, the FCC stands out not for exceptional performance here, that's my words, but for its extensive use of events where officials speak on behalf of the agency to groups of reporters, but the officials can't be identified by name or quoted verbatim. And on page 4, the Lifeline program, where Commissioner Pai indicates that he didn't learn about that from your office, Mr. Chairman, but instead from the New York Times. So would you please respond to that as to
Sure.
why is that? That doesn't seem like things are healthy in your agency.
Thank you, Congressman. You know, one of the challenges we face is that the topics we discuss are very complex. I think it's why you say that this is one of the more interesting hearings that you have, or at least I hope it is. And so do we hold briefings so that people understand exactly what we're proposing? Yes, sir. Insofar as the New York Times article was proposed, I mean, golly, you know, when we were before the Senate Commerce Committee, several of us testified that we were about to bring out a Lifeline. Commissioner O'Reilly it was not a great secret that we were working on a Lifeline order.
Well, let me just say that I think the Commissioner put it in because it's a sincerely and deeply held assessment, and a troubling one, of the agency. And, you know, to the extent that we serve as some type of board of directors on this, and I know we're probably the last ones to talk about how to work across the aisle here, but that needs attention. Let me pivot over to something that a local constituent on the Eastern Shore of Virginia has brought to our attention. He's concerned about, with the repackaging or repacking, the sharp increase and the demands on the supply chain are really going to stretch it beyond its breaking point. I guess if you're one of those vendors, all good. But could you put this in somewhat of some context for us? Is it a 50% increase in the load, 100% increase in the load? Is it going to roll out from East Coast to West Coast? Can we ship in, like sometimes you know when you have a storm, all the tree companies kind of come in and then you roll? How's that going to work?
Thank you, Congressman. And your constituent has identified a very real issue. I mean, I was shocked to find what the number of actual antenna erectors are, and we have to think about it in a regional approach, for instance, because you got to represent weather and you ought to be able to get scale and move a team in there and hit this area and then move on to the next area and this sort of thing. Again, this is something we have to orchestrate. This is why, the incentive auction is over, you don't need to spend any more money, is something I've been saying to this committee. We need to make sure we've got the money to address these problems, because it's going to be hard. There are going to be challenges. We can't scope them right now because we don't know whether it's 500 or 1,000 licensees that are going to end up being repacked.
All right, so I see. So you've really got to have the auction to really to get your full grasp of just the physical aspect of this.
Sir. But we need to have, but Commissioner Pai and I are in violent agreement on the fact that we need to have a waiver process to take care of interim things, and if there's a need to revisit it, because the realities, I mean, we're moving from dealing now with, well, here's this study, but here's this other study, you know, pick which study you want to go with. We're going to have a real life study, and we're going to know.
Finally, until that light turns red right there, I do want to ask you, you mentioned something that was very troubling, not about the agency there, but about Sandy was saying something about listening in. Was that just
Samsung.
Samsung?
Yes, sir.
Sorry. Okay, Samsung. In a literal sense, what?
Yes, sir.
Well, my time's up, but I'd like to.
I'll be happy to talk to you offline
Okay.
about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Well, we've had one round of questions. We're going to vote very, very shortly, and it's about an hour's worth of votes, so I think it'd be hard to keep our witnesses here and then turn around and come back an hour later. So let's keep going, and we'll go as far as we can. And real quick, my time ran out, and I didn't get a chance to ask Commissioner Pai to comment on this whole issue about rate regulation. I think we got some interesting thoughts from the chairman. Give us your take on this situation.
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chairman. This is a pretty remarkable issue. President Obama, on November 10th, when he instructed the FCC to adopt Title II, said, "But I don't want you to regulate rates." The chairman said to this committee and to others publicly, the FCC is not going to regulate rates. Congress proposed legislation saying the FCC shall not regulate rates. All of a sudden, simply codifying that promise has thrown everybody into a tizzy about the new nitty-gritty of statutory interpretation, what the meaning of is. To me, it's not that complicated. If the agency wants to forswear from ex ante and ex post rate regulation, which is what everybody says is the case, then there's no harm, as the chairman committed to last year, to Congress simply saying so. And I think the fact that we cannot reach agreement on such something as basic as this portends a great deal of uncertainty and regulatory activity, if not for this commission, for some future commission that is not going to show similar restraint, either to Congress or to the American people.
Well, thank you for that. Yes, sir.
The prison phone call issue, which you acted on, and I think just over a week ago, the D.C. Circuit entered an order blocking the implementation of that on putting caps on the rates. Will you guys consider or continue to try to provide some help so that families and inmates will not be faced with these extraordinary rates that they had been prior to your implementation of that rule?
That's a great question, Congressman. Back in 2013, when the FCC addressed interstate rates, this is before the Chairman Wheeler came on board, I put a proposal on the table because I thought that the agency's order was on shaky legal foundations. A few months later, the D.C. Circuit unfortunately stayed the interstate portion of our decision. The most recent round relating to intrastate rates, I said, look, we need to find a bipartisan solution to this because the order that we're adopting is on similarly shaky legal foundation. Yet again, the D.C. Circuit stayed that decision. Now, the question, it seems to me, is what is ultimately going to benefit the people who are in prison and their loved ones? Is it an agency that stakes out ground that is on quicksand? Or is it an agency working together in a bipartisan way within the confines of the law to provide relief? I would humbly submit that it's the latter, but unfortunately, that's not the way that this proceeding has gone.
There's a 30-second follow-up to that. If this body or any body strips the FCC of its ability to regulate rates, those inmate calling rates are gone. This was the problem with what the proposal is. They go through the roof because what the proposal said was not what I said, which was if you want to prohibit deforbearance on rates in the future, go ahead. Whatever happened, it suddenly became all about every rate. And that means those rates go out the window. That means that the judgment about rates for video relay services go out the window. That means the judgment about paid prioritization, which is inherently a rate activity, goes out the window. All of these other ancillary things go out the window if the FCC is stripped of its rate-making authority, which is what the proposal has been.
We went back and forth with your staff over some of these issues, but I saw Commissioner Pai shake his head. Maybe you could give us your 30 seconds on this.
Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, again, this is not complicated. First of all, the legislation would not strip the FCC of its rate-making authority in these other areas because those areas rely, for example, with respect to mobile roaming rates, on our Title I authority to ensure commercial reasonableness when these arrangements are forged. Second of all, if indeed that this kind of rate regulation is off the table, then what exactly was it that the FCC committed to last year? What exactly was it that President Obama was telling the FCC to refrain from? All the Congress is doing, you would know better than me, is simply codifying the commitment that the chairman and the president made almost over a year ago. And this should not be that difficult. And I think that the language that the House Energy and Commerce Committee came up with was sufficient. I think that the entire debate over this appropriations language highlights the fact that rate regulation is on the table. It's within the FCC's order, both ex post and, I would argue, ex ante potentially. And there's no way to firmly shut the door on it unless Congress speaks through legislation.
Well, thank you for that. My time's expired now. I was going to yield some time to Mr. Graves, but I don't have any more time. So, Mr. Serrano, if you want to yield any time to Mr. Graves, you can.
I may. Your comment, Chairman Wheeler, got Mr. Riegler to ask a question, which I was going to ask. So the old line that we used to hear when somebody was asleep and you got them on the phone, are you watching TV, and said, no, the TV's watching me, it's not for real. The TV is watching you, the TV is listening to you. And secondly, have you been called in, has the FCC been called in to the Apple versus FBI controversy? And lastly, what role do you play in the privacy issue for consumers, if at all?
Let me see if I can, so on the first issue of have we been, I guess it was second issue, we've been called in on Apple. No, that's above our pay grade. We're not a national security anti-terrorism agency. Second, on the...
Yeah, but the issue, the privacy issue?
I'll come to the privacy issue in a second.
Right.
The second issue of about what smart TVs can do. Yes, I mean, there's a multitude of devices in your house that can listen to what's going on. You know, the Echo that Commissioner Pai talked about does that all the time, the Amazon Echo. Samsung put out, I think appropriately, this notice that people should not talk in front of their digital television set because it can hear and store what they're saying. This goes to the heart of the privacy issue. Because last week, we proposed, and the Commission will vote on a notice of proposed rulemaking, hopefully later this month on the 31st, that consumers have the right to determine whether or not, the case may be, they know all the details about me. And in many instances can actually look at what's inside the message. And so what we were saying is that we think the consumer has the right to say, do I want that information looked at? And that if they do, terrific. The company can go, they can, because what they do is they package that information up and they sell it to advertisers, or they sell it to insurance companies, or they sell it to others who, because, you know, information is the currency of the 21st century. Data is the currency of the 21st century. And so we're not saying to the carriers, you can't do that. We're just saying it's not your information, it's the consumer's information, and the consumer ought to have the right to say yes or no as to whether you do it. And so, I mean, that is a key activity that we're going to be voting on to open a proposed rulemaking later this month.
But why wouldn't you tell the company you can't do that? I mean, when people bought a TV set, we all bought TV sets, we didn't know that we were being watched or listened to. And it's not a matter, you know, the old line, you know, what do you have to hide? That's not the point. We were built as a society, you know, that believes in privacy.
So two things. First of all, the TV set.
I mean, I don't want that presidential candidate that I've been saying is you know, been recording what I've been saying about him because he might get back at me.
I don't want to get these two issues conflated. The TV set is something that the FTC oversees. What we have is the information in and out of the TV set, if you will, and what the network does there. And I can think that, yes, there are many consumers who will want to have this, because they'll want to have the ability for advertisements to show up that say, hey, I see you've been going on this website looking at hotels in Paris. Here's Air France's special airfare, or whatever the case may be. And the carriers want to sell that. The consumer may want to have the benefit of that, and that's terrific. I just think it's the consumer who ought to say, excuse me, it's the consumer's information to decide, not the carrier's information. And that there will be a room for both of them to work things out.
Thank you. Mr. Graves has a quick question. We're voting now, and as the members know, they don't leave the board open as long as they used to. So if members have other questions, please feel free to submit them to the record. We'll have them addressed.
I have
Mr.
questions
Graves.
for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to submit for the record, if there's not any objection, a letter that was sent to the full committee and to this subcommittee that very well states some of the concerns or objections to the discussion we've had as it relates to set-top boxes by some organizations that are strong advocates of taxpayers. So if there's no objection, I'd like to submit that for the record, and then make an additional point or two that I think brings clarity to it for me a little bit more, in that it seems very clear that if this rule proceeds, that there will be additional expenses or costs for consumers, that there will be an additional device required potentially for consumers, and that as well, internet providers, third parties are not under the same rules and regulations as current industries that you currently regulate. Is that accurate in all cases, which I just stated?
That is, Congressman, accurate, too. And it also bleeds over to the privacy side as well, if I might, with your indulgence. The FCC is proposing one set of privacy regulations for internet service providers, but if you're a consumer, you have a uniform expectation of privacy, as the chairman aptly put it before the House Energy and Commerce Committee last November. Unfortunately, the FCC, having now caused a problem because previously the Federal Trade Commission had a uniform set of rules in this ecosystem, now we are going to regulate one segment of the industry one way. The FTC presumably is going to regulate the rest of the industry another way, and there's going to be a hodgepodge of regulation.
Great, thank you.
It is not correct that a second box is going to be required. That was a proposal from 2010. Those who don't like this have been trying to spread that. Actually, what's going to happen is you'll have fewer boxes. You can have no box, or you can go buy your own box and have to quit and don't have to pay the $10 a month anymore. You can buy a box for $50 at Best Buy.
Is it possible that you will have to have a new box? And if you did have a new box, that would cost a consumer?
It is, you will not have to have a new box. Let me just be real specific. One, you can keep the box that you have, and you can keep paying month after month after month on that box, even after it's long paid off. Or two, you can get your own box, as I say at Best Buy, for $50 and pay once $50, and then the 6th month be clean. There is not a need to have two boxes to deliver one service.
Any other thoughts on that?
Congressman, I take a different view. I think that the great likelihood is that you will have to have a second box, and the reason is that if you are the existing MVPD, the video programming distributor, either you will have to re-architect your network in order to allow this third-party device to connect with it, right, which will engender a tremendous amount of cost that's going to be passed on to you, the consumer, or you will have to have all these additional boxes that will have to be flooding into consumers' homes. There's just no way around it, and that's part of the reason.
More remote controls, too, right?
That's not reality. We're going to go from multiple remote controls to one remote control. I mean, your point is spot on. The reason you have multiple remote controls today is you've got a controller for your smart TV, and you've got a controller for your cable.
Chairman's watching the clock over there, too.
But you understand what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. If you can take all of those and put them together into one box, not one additional box, one box, that's what we're saying the cable operators need to be able to allow their data, not their programming content, that goes untouched, their data to operate another box so you can integrate them together. There is no need for a second box.
Sounds like a presidential debate from years gone by. Black boxes. All right, thank you, Chairman.
Sounds like there's a difference of opinion there, but again, let me thank the witnesses for being here. Appreciate the work you do, and this meeting is adjourned.
Hope we didn't put you in a box.
Whoa! And on that note.
I can't.